This is a Crowd podcast.
Took an oath long ago, to protect this country and everything in it against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And every one of us still believes that oath. I'm never going to become the things that we fight against, and I'd be damned if I'm going to live knowing that I created terror in somebody's life that didn't deserve it.
So we're slowly peeling back the layers of Casey's personality. What drives him? What makes him tick? In this episode, you're going to hear more bits about his childhood, which might just explain why he is so hellbent on rescuing children in danger. See, there are some things that I've grown slowly sure about with Casey, especially after our last chat. His stories can be funny.
What the hell are you doing out there? And me and Murphy laughing our asses off. We're like, oh yeah, you're a real sneaky fucker. You didn't even make it halfway. You know, he's like, fuck you guys.
He can be dark and threatening.
I made that guy take his clothes off right in front of me. And I said, you turn around. I said, I'm going to have some of that sweet ass, buddy.
He can be argumentative, but to be honest, so can I.
You think that if somebody comes into your house...
I'm not thinking anything.
No, you hold on. You just open this can and now you're going to eat it.
I'm also growing more comfortable in his company, and I want to start asking him things which until now have been niggling away at me. Sometimes hours after our chats. Brief comments he makes about people, about things he's done. Like this, a few weeks ago.
I have done work for law enforcement in the past. It's not work that would be considered above board.
Is that something that would be in public record?
I doubt it.
He's also spoken a lot, hasn't he, about his mum and a little bit about a sister. But are there more? And what about his dad? Do you remember this?
And I walked back the whole way crying, this little bird in my hand, bleeding all over my hand. And my dad said, you got to eat it, boy. I said, what, Papa? And he goes, you got to eat it.
Who is or who was Casey's dad? We're about to find out a lot more about him and that law enforcement story. So why are you talking to me?
You know, in a pack of wolves, there's a leader. And one day that leader gets old. And when it misses the kill, the pack can't eat. And I always told my team when I couldn't be the first one in the door and the last one out, I was going to step aside. So I'm here because I think that by telling our story finally, I think that there's going to be people out there that are going to realize that there's people like me and my team that will hunt you down and make you stand before God for what you did.
I'm Sam Walker, and this is American Vigilante, Episode 6, Sons and Fathers. So, you've told us a bit about your heritage and about, your mom's heritage and your dad's heritage, but can you tell us a bit about your family and who makes up your family when you were growing up?
I come from a big family. It's actually spread all over the country now. A lot of sisters. I guess it would consider a lot of brothers too, but a lot of sisters. So I grew up incredibly, I wouldn't say understanding women, but having a better understanding of how women are.
You the oldest?
No.
Where do you fit?
I fit just below midway down.
Right.
I've got younger and I've got older. My mother and father, hardworking people. When they met, my mother was a model. My dad was in the military at the time. And he worked 3 jobs. He drove, more than an hour to commute to his main job. And then he'd get home and he would go and work at another job until the wee hours of the morning. He would only slept 2 to 3 hours a night. And then on the weekends, he worked another job. So he worked hard to support all of us. And he took us fishing and took us swimming when he could, but he worked a lot. Taught me how to build houses, log house, rode horses, shot guns. Had a pretty good upbringing, could run and play freely and didn't have to worry about a lot of things. Went on picnics, grew up swimming in rivers and lakes.
So happy childhood. You were happy?
Yeah and no. That same time when I was 7 years old, I had a pretty negative experience with my father. that carried with me through my life. That was the year that my father and mother actually got a divorce. I got my first BB gun when I was 5, and I got a .22 old single-shot Marlin when I was 6. When my dad was teaching us how devastating a gun could be, he took his 12-gauge out and he put a watermelon up on top of a fence post. He loaded that 12-gauge, I know now, with probably number 8 shot, which spreads really quickly. And I'm standing there with my .22 just getting ready to learn how to shoot it. And my dad lifts up that 12-gauge and he shot that watermelon and splattered it all over the place. And I mean, gone. And he looked at us and he says, "That's a bullet." He said, "Remember what that does to things." He said, "If you don't know where that bullet's going, you don't pull that trigger. Ever." He said, "You don't ever point a gun at somebody." He goes, "You don't shoot at things you're not supposed to." He says, "Because I'll beat you within an inch of your life." So I was 7 years old and my mom and dad were arguing really bad. And I'd come walking up the hallway. And my mom and dad were in the kitchen, and Mom was cooking on the stove. She had cooked on big, huge cast iron skillets. And my dad, he's an iron worker. I mean, he's strong as a bull. I mean, he had forearms looked like Popeye. They were fighting and arguing, and Mom had turned around right as I walked up the hallway, and she turned around that skillet, and she hit my dad right in the head with it. And I mean, she hit him hard. Probably would have killed him, but he always wore a cowboy hat. He had his Stetson cowboy hat on. And so it smashed the hat and it knocked him down, and he fell against the cupboards, and instinctively he turned around, and I'm standing there watching this, doubled up fist, and he stroked my mom right between the eyes. Honestly, thinking about it now, he was half-addled, but it was instinctive, and he knocked her down. Well, here I am, a 7-year-old little boy that's been drilled into me by my father to protect my mom, no matter what. I went running back to my room, and I picked up my .22 off that gun rack, and I'm not supposed to touch it without my dad's permission. And I walked back into that kitchen, and I had to point it right at my dad's belly, and I said, "I'm going to kill you, Daddy." Boy, let me tell you what, that was not the thing to do. My dad, quick as a cat, snatched that gun out of my hands with that rifle barrel. He was bleeding out of his head, and he gave me the whooping I've ever had in my day. I mean, he used his hand, and he pulled off his belt and used his belt, and he beat me within an inch of my life. And I think our relationship changed a lot that day, because out of all of us kids, he was a lot harder on me. A lot harder. He got so mad at me one time, he beat me until I was black and blue from my shoulder blades clear down to the back of my knees. He beat me bad. I couldn't even hardly walk. I remember my mom, bathing my legs and my back because they were so black and blue and I couldn't hardly move.
That's horrific.
But he never did to nobody else. Never did to my older brothers or sisters or my younger brothers or sisters. It was just me. When I was really young, I was allergic to my mom's breast milk and goat's milk, cow's milk. I mean, I lived on iced tea and Jello water from the time I was an infant until I was probably 2 years old. And I was pretty sickly and weak because of it. I guess from what I understand, my family actually had to stay up around the clock, and I would stop breathing in the middle of the night. My older brothers and sisters would take turns with my parents, and when I stopped breathing, they'd hold me upside down by my feet and beat on my back till I started breathing again. So, I don't know. Maybe in the back of my dad's head it was because I was smaller or weaker. I've got no idea. But no matter what I did, I always got a real bad whooping. And I got to the point that I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't let him hear me cry. I remember I was 13 years old and I had a BB gun, and me and my brother figured out we could take the end out of the BB gun, and you could put paper wads in it so there was no BBs in it, the thing that shot the BBs. And we found this bucket of tar, and so we were putting the BB guns in the tar and pulling out and shooting tar at each other. Well, my dad come home, and he saw that bucket of tar sitting open, and he asked who'd been in there, and I just said it was me. He blew up. He blew up, and that was the first time he ever hit me with a closed fist. Punched me right in the jaw, knocked me down. I was laying on my back on my elbows, kind of foggy. My father stood at me and he goes, "You get up." He goes, "Get up. You want a shot at the old man? Get up." And I just shook my head. And he goes, "You ready?" I said, "I'm not ready, Dad." But I didn't cry. But then one day, when I got a little older, I started to grow and I started to catch up. My brother is an incredible mechanic. And at that age, he had went into the garage and he'd taken my dad's chainsaw apart, but he couldn't remember how to put it back together. My dad come home from work, and it was that Saturday we were supposed to go cut wood, and he got out the garage, and here's his chainsaw scattered in pieces. And my brother was standing in front of me in the garage, and my dad started screaming and yelling, and he was like, "Who in the hell took this apart? Who took this apart?" And my baby brother had stepped up within about 5 feet of him, and he said, "I did, Dad." And my dad was so angry, he's like exploding. He picked up this old steel tire pump. I don't know if you know what they are. They got a T-handle on the top, and they were steel with a little rubber hose on the bottom that you'd hand pump. And he was slamming it on the workbench, just slamming it. He's like, "God damn, you know." And I saw his anger building, and I knew it was about to happen. Right as he was turning around swinging that pump, "You don't care about my stuff," and he just swung that tire pump, I stepped up and I pushed my brother out of the way, and he hit me right in the side of the head with that tire pump, and he dropped me. I went down. Well, I wasn't small at 16. I wasn't big, but I wasn't small. I was wrestling at that time, so I was probably in one of the best shapes of my life other than when I was in the military. And when he hit me in the head and knocked me down, laying on the floor there was a big old piece of diesel fuel hose, 2 inches across, and it was heavy, and this thing was about 3 feet long. And I shook my head, and I picked that thing up, and I said, "I'm ready, Dad." And I went back at him, and he and I sat there beating the crap out of each other. I remember every time he hit me, I'd bounce off the wall or bounce off the floor, and he'd be on me quick. But I was in better shape than him, and my wrestling coach always said, "If you're in better shape than your opponent, you'll always win no matter what." He goes, "Because all you got to do is outlast him." And I trying to give as good as I got, but I wasn't quite. But then finally he started running out of gas, and I was just getting going. And I beat that man like I've never beat anybody in my life. I beat that big, strong man until he was unconscious on the floor. My brother watched the whole thing. When I was done, I grabbed his hair and I picked his head up, and I shook him awake, and I told him, I says, "I'm leaving." I said, "If you ever touch my brother or sister," I said, "I'm going to come back and kill you." Now, I had just bought myself a car. I'd sold some of my cattle that I'd raised. So I went in and packed my stuff up. And I'd been taking my brother and sister back to school because we lived a long ways away. I mean, just to walk to our bus stop was a considerable distance, and no matter what the weather was, it was a long hike. We had to sometimes take a couple different changes of shoes because walking through the deep water and the snow would get too wet. And I'd still come back every morning and take them to school, but I lived on my own and fended for myself after that.
What you've just described to me, Casey, is a childhood in which you were abused. And you might say, well, he was a good pop and he worked 3 jobs and he took us fishing when he could. He abused you.
Oh, I'm not defending him. I'm just telling you the facts.
No, yeah, right. But
I mean, don't get me wrong. I know I got my ass kicked way more than I needed it to, believe me.
You never needed to get your ass kicked.
Oh, I know that.
How do you feel about him now?
I love him. He and I made our peace.
I mean, what's interesting, and I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you here, I'm really not, because it's not something I'm skilled in, but...
You're a mom, you liar. You're skilled as hell.
What you're doing now is protecting kids from people like your dad. You grew up being abused.
Well, I protect old people and women, too. And men. So, it ain't just kids.
What opportunities did you have when you walked out of that house at 16 and were pretty much homeless?
Pretty shameful part of my life. I had to steal to be able to finish putting myself through high school. You know, I was taught not to lie, not to cheat, not to steal, and it's probably the least proud time of my life. I went and negotiated for a place to stay, and I had to pay rent. It was a little trailer. And I ended up getting one really good job that I can't talk about because it had nailed down pretty much who I was and the little area I was in. But during the school year, and I was adamant about finishing my school, I had no way to make ends meet. So I would sneak over to the bus shed where the school was, and I'd have to climb that big old chain link fence that was like 8 feet tall, And I'd take 2 5-gallon gas cans, and I had a big old stick between them. And I would go to each bus and only take out a little bit until those cans were full. So I might take, a gallon out of each bus. And then I'd go and put the gas in my car, and that'd give me enough, 10 gallons, give me enough gas to go back and forth to school for the whole next week. So that's how I made it through school for 2 years, was siphoning gas out of the buses. I probably should write my school a check and pay them back, because they managed to help me get through school for 2 years.
A lot of people would have thought, hey, what's the point of a high school diploma? Life is hard. I'm just going to get out there. What made you want to finish?
I don't know, but I've never been good at quitting anything. I don't like to quit.
So, it's starting to make sense to me now. After all of those experiences as a child, how someone could have Casey's view on life. And you know what? I'm slowly finding it harder, really hard, to doubt the things he tells me. Surely only real life can be this cruel, this complex. He's got another story for us when we come back after this.
You've watched them in unforgettable adventures, love affairs, and tragedies. Now it's time to hear their own remarkable stories. From the makers of Death of a Rock Star and Death of a Sports Star, this is Death of a Film Star.
And action.
Starring Heath Ledger, Marilyn Monroe, Chadwick Boseman, Robin Williams, Carrie Fisher, and Bruce Lee. Search for Death of a Film Star in your podcast app. You've seen them tell stories. Now it's time to tell theirs.
There's another thing I definitely do know about KC. He's not telling me everything. Yet sometimes his tongue slips.
All right, I'm sorry. I gotta stop that.
He asks for little details to be cut from his stories.
Sorry, gotta take that out.
To make sure that no one and nowhere can be identified.
You need to edit that word. Understand? Edit that word.
I've also learned that I need to make it really clear when I've hit record.
Damn it, you gotta start telling me when you're gonna start recording. Yeah, don't worry. We can cut that out. Trust me, you've made your living trusting everybody. Strangely, I do trust you.
And in Casey's next story, it feels like he's watching his words very carefully.
All right. This was a woman that owned a major corporation, and at times she financially backed wealthy people that would get into trouble, and she'll front the money for them to get out of jail. She'd sent me all over the country on several times, and even out of the country, to get people, bring them back, things like that. Always very well paid. Really nice woman. Knew her and her husband for years. Anyway, on this special case, she calls me one day, and she's like, KC. I'm like, yeah. She goes, I really need your help. And I go, okay, well, what's going on? She goes, well, it's not for me. A law enforcement agency wants to contract you. They really want your services. In fact, they called me looking for you. So I reached out and called them. I called the number, and they immediately transferred me right to the captain. The captain said, hey, KC, he goes, we only know about you because you've managed to bring several people in for Shauna. That was the woman's name. And we know that you personally have saved her financially a few times because she'd put up more than millions of dollars for people, and she was close to financial ruin because she did these things, and you always managed to come through. And I was like, well, thank you for that. And he's like, well, he goes, this is what happened. 2 of my officers responded to a call. There was a young man, a very big young man. He's about 6'5", and he weighs about 250 pounds. And he was partying, 21st birthday. Got in a fight with some people, beat him up real bad, kind of broke the place up a little bit, which was a normal fight. The officers responded to this, and when he found out the police were coming, he got in a vehicle and he left, and he was very drunk. They saw the direction that he was going when they arrived, pursued him. He finally pulled over, they said, and whenever he got out of the vehicle, he beat both of them up very badly. Very, very badly. I mean, we're talking hospitalized. Then he got into their police car and went joyriding. Well, of course, warrant issued for his arrest, and the search is going on. Well, this went on about 5-6 days, and come to find out, his parents are each state troopers from another state. So this captain personally contacted the parents, and they said, we haven't seen him, we don't know where he's at, nothing. No sign of this guy nowhere, but they did find out where he'd flown out, and they did find out that he had flown into the city in the state where these people are, where his parents are. And the law enforcement agency in that state, they're like, well, we haven't seen him, nobody knows anything. Well, they didn't believe him. They smelled shit, That state has a lot of corruption in it. It just does. And so I saddled up, and I drove through the night, and I arrived the next day, and I met with the captain. We sat down and had a long conversation about what my fee would be, and I says, all I want is reimbursement for fuel. I said, a good meal when I get back, all my expenses paid. I says, and you pay me $1,000. And he goes, deal. So that was it. I was doing this for $1,000 and expenses.
Why did you do that? Why did you make that decision?
Law and order is the basis of our society. Now, there's good cops and there's bad cops. But you know what? There's good grocery store clerks and there's bad grocery store clerks. There's good janitors and bad janitors. But without law and order, you have nothing. You have nothing. And then whenever law and order fails, or you start allowing people to completely separate themselves from law and order, you're no better than that scum. But those are cops that are doing wrong and doing bad. When you got two officers doing their job, they got wives, they got kids. They don't deserve to be beaten and hospitalized, treated like that. No. Why'd I do it? Because it's morally the right thing to do.
You talked about this contact of yours who essentially gets rich folk out of the shit when they've overstepped the mark. That kind of surprised me because morally that seems quite different to some of the other jobs you've talked about. A lot of people might think, do you know what?
Well, bail bondsmen do the same thing.
Can you explain the role of a bail bondsman for people who might not know what it is?
So if the court makes an arrest, and let's just say they arrest somebody and they put a $50,000 bond on that person, a bail bondsman puts up collateral for that $50,000 but charges a 10% fee. But they get collateral from you for up to $50,000. So you'll either sign over your house or something. That's what she did. People that really needed a lot of money, significant amount of money, she would cover that. But that's the thing. She was putting up so much money. I mean, there's 2 times she almost lost her home because people screwed her. I mean, I literally had to bring somebody back one time, and I got them back 4 hours before she was going to lose everything. So I was in the War Wagon, and I was about 12 hours from them. I get there, and this is a big, big city, okay? I set up surveillance on the first day, and it was kind of hard because, I'm in out-of-state plates, and I'm in a big rig, and I'm thinking, this might not be the thing doing that. I thought, well, wait a minute, it's summer. I said, this is okay. I said, and my windows are tinted, so I'm sitting there watching. I'm just watching the house. I'm parked on a street, a big residential area, not a big deal. I'm sitting in the back seat. You can't see me. Got my ice chest back there, and, I'm just kicking back. And I'm watching this house. And I see them leave for work the next day, and then I see one of them come home at lunch. I don't see any movement in the house, nothing in the front yard. There's no fence on the front yard at all, but there's a fence on the backyard, but it's a chain link, and it's only like 4 feet. And it's a nice backyard, nice residential area. So it's later in the day, and I see both the state trooper cars come back. They both pull into their driveway and park. And I've got a spotting scope with me, and I'm sitting there watching. So I've got a clear view into the kitchen, through a little breakfast nook, and into what's looked like the dining area to me. She's messing around the kitchen, and then all of a sudden I see somebody walk across. And it wasn't her husband, but I can't get a positive ID. There's nobody holding still. Don't see nothing the rest of the night. So the next morning, they both get up, husband and wife. You know, I see their police cars leave. They did their breakfast thing, whatever. No more movement in the house all day, but only they left. Only 2 people left. So I'm sitting there, and it was right around 10:30, 11 o'clock. I get a full frontal in the bay window. And I'm like, there's that little son of a bitch right there. So I just keep watching. He doesn't go anywhere all day. He stays in the house. Now, mind you, this is a major city. This is a suburb. Lots of traffic, lots of people. There is no way in God's green earth I'm going in there and making a big scene in the middle of the day when traffic's at a high volume. Just big, stupid move. There's no way I'll get out of the state. But I wanted to try to get these people at the dinner time or later at night. And the thing is when, you know, most people go to bed, cops, later at night, they're usually sleeping with a gun by their side. Even normal Americans a lot will sleep and have guns in their room. So I decided the prime time to get them was going to be dinner time because I figured that their guns were going to be sitting somewhere, hanging up. They weren't going to be carrying them. They're going to be eating dinner, right? And when somebody's hungry, believe me, they're not thinking about nothing but what they're eating. So I took a drive around the neighborhood. And, you know, houses here are probably 100 feet apart. Decent-sized yards, but not real big. And I noticed the back of their yard, they've got a big deck that comes out of the back of their house. There's like a sliding glass door. And they got a swimming pool back there. And I was pretty happy about this because the way that the yard was set up, you know, they had a hedge like around the back. And the hedge was only like 4 feet tall. But it gives me a little bit of cover. And then the swimming pool was kind of paved around it with that like pebble rock concrete. So this thing was laid out like that. And I was like, okay, this could work. This could work. Because sliding glass doors, they're not that hard for me to get into.
I'm going to pause the story there for a moment to say that there is another thing that Casey has mentioned a good few times now, which I am just itching to know more about. It's his truck that he claims can drive from coast to coast of the United States without refueling. The War Wagon.
Well, this thing's designed for long distance and for comfort, and it's made to carry and have everything that I might even possibly need. It's got an incredible fuel capacity. It is turbo diesel, modified. It can cruise at 80 miles an hour and get almost 30 miles to the gallon, and it weighs 8,000 pounds. You can drive coast to coast in it without refueling. There's a lot of states and places that, you know, if you're transporting a prisoner, you're not supposed to be transporting a prisoner. If you're not a cop, you're not allowed to have them in custody. So if you stop at a gas station, your average gas station stop is 15 minutes and somebody sees somebody chained up in the back or a cop pulls in behind you or next to you, that just increases the probability of you having a problem. So I've tried to eliminate all of that. It's got a special box in the back that carries a lot of equipment in it. It's called the Box of Woe. Because as Forrest said, whoa, shit, what's in there? So it bailed us out a couple times. Forrest got in there and had to get into the Box of Woe and pull out some pretty cool equipment that kept us out of some crap. It's got a modified fuel tank that was actually built into the entire rear floor so that it feeds the factory tank.
And as you said, you know, you think about all the logistics of the stuff you need to carry and having to travel, but you scooted over something a little bit where you said comfort. Because if you're going to sit in a vehicle for 3,000 miles or sit outside somewhere for a couple of weeks, it needs to be comfortable as well.
It does. It does. I've spent a lot of money on those seats, making sure that my ass doesn't feel numb when I get out of it. And, you know, it's set up too so that 2 guys can sleep in it. But you have to move some of the equipment in the back, but it's all easily moved. It's the way it's set up. It's completely set up so that you can sit inside of it and do surveillance for a week or two and not have to actually get out of it. I mean, it's really set up well.
So I'm guessing, well, they don't sell these, of course, on your local car lot. Everybody can figure that. But how big a job, how much of a process is it to go and pick a truck up, say, from a car lot and then create the War Wagon? How long does it take? How much does it cost?
Well, everybody's going to be different. I set this thing up in case I had to ram people, or at the same time it's set up to be able to give me capabilities to go in crazy rough outdoor areas. So the suspension's, highly modified. The fuel capabilities are phenomenal. I can be very diversified on using fuel if I need to. You can spend $3,000 modifying it, or you could spend $30,000 modifying it. And the thing is the modifications to this are done so that it pretty much still just looks like a normal vehicle, other than it's slightly taller. It's got a little bit bigger tires on it.
Now, I'm guessing my kind of local shop, my car shop down the road, isn't going to be able to do something like this. How much do you do?
We do all of it ourselves.
That's what I was going to ask. You don't have some guys who ask no questions?
No. I mean, some of my team members, you got to understand that the team's also very diverse. We've got doctors and paramedics and engineers and welders, and we've got a pretty good diverse background, so we have capabilities to do a lot of things.
Do you name your War Wagon, or is it War Wagon?
No, it's War Wagon.
Okay. Back to the story. Casey is in the wagon, of course, peering through his spotting scope into the house of those state troopers and their son.
So again, I watched that night, and the routine started the same. Mama came home, and she went right in. She was still in her uniform, but she'd start doing whatever prep for dinner, and pretty much the same routine's going on. And I thought, you know what? This is probably just about the perfect time. And this is the time of night everybody's coming home, everybody's at dinner, traffic's at a minimum, but the cars are lining the streets. So I waited. I saw her cutting the food up. I saw everything else. I saw her getting dishes out, and I seen her walking back and forth, and I seen him come out, and he's like helping set the table. So they finally get in there, and I see him sitting down to the table, and I'm like, okay, well, this is it. So I fired up the wagon. I pulled it forward about the half a block, and I pulled up onto their block. Their house was here, neighbor's house was here, and I parked kind of halfway in between them, where it wouldn't look like I was coming to their house. And I got out, I walked up, and I'm looking through the glass of the door. There's just a little area that you can see through the door going in the kitchen, and I can see them. They're all sitting right at the kitchen table. And both their guns are hanging over off to the side on this little table. So I eased my pick in there and started working the lock, and it took me about 25 seconds. I had the lock open, and I opened the door, and I walked in, and I had my gun out. I closed the door, and I walked right over, and I told them all, don't move. I said, don't move. I said, everybody put your hands on the table. And immediately, the father started to open his mouth, and I said, shut up. I said, you start yelling, you start screaming, anything goes bad. I said, you're harboring a fugitive. There's a federal warrant for him right now. I says, I will use whatever force I need to apprehend him. I says, and if you come at me, I said, I'm going to drop you. And I had my gun pointed right at his face. I said, now put your fucking hands on the table. And oh, he was pissed. I mean, his face was purple and a vein was bulging out on his head. He was pissed, and he wanted to tear me in half. And the mom, she just sat there. Her hands were flat on the table like this. And the kid was like looking around, and I said, don't do it, man. I said, you try to run. I said, I'm going to drop you right here in this fucking house. I said, and your parents will get charged. I said, and your parents will go to jail. I said, understand that right now. And he like looked at his mom, and his mom just said, don't, baby. Just don't move. And I said, okay. I pointed at the husband, pulled out my zip ties. I threw them over to him. I says, I need you to come over here and zip tie your wife's hands behind her back. And he looked at me. I said, you heard me? And he goes, you realize that we're state troopers? I says, yes, sir, I do. I says, and I'm enjoying every second of this. I said, now zip tie your wife's hands. I said, and if either one of you starts yelling, I says, I'm going to gag you with your own fucking socks. So he went over, zip tied his wife, and the whole time I was holding my gun on him. I told his son, I handed his son zip ties, threw them to him, and I said, right now, you zip tie your father to your mother. So he did. Cinched them up nice and tight. So they're sitting back to back, their hands are zip tied together. And I looked at him, I says, I said, before I leave here, I'm going to have to gag you guys. I says, I promise when I get far enough away, I said, I'll make a phone call. But first, I said, I do have something else I have to do. I looked at the young man. I says, put your hands out in front of you. He put them out. I zip-tied his hands together in front of him. And I reached around behind him, and I said, now don't you move. And I got behind him, and I put a zip tie through the feet of the chair he was sitting in, around his feet, his ankles, and I zip-tied his feet together to that chair. And I said, now you just stay right here for a second. And I went over and I took their guns and I took the bullets out of them and threw it all in the pool. I threw the bullets individually in the pool. I threw the guns in the pool. I threw their gun belts in the pool. And I was very happy doing this the whole time. So I got towels out of the kitchen and I used those as a gag. I put a rag inside the woman's mouth and tied another towel around her mouth, gagged her up real good. Did the same thing with her husband. And I looked over at the boy. I says, I just want you to know. I said that your parents are in this position right now because of you. So I cut the zip ties off his ankles. He asked me if he could give his mom a kiss. And I said, yeah. And the whole time the husband was glaring at me. I mean, if his eyes could have burned rock, they would have. And he went over and I heard him say, I'm sorry, Mom. And he gave her a kiss. And she started crying. It's the first time she showed any emotion other than anger toward me. I said, now, you and I are going to walk right out of this house. I said, if you try to run, you try to do anything, I said, I'm going to shoot you in the back of the head. I think he believed me. We walked out the War Wagon. He opened the passenger door. I got him in there, and I put shackles on his legs right there and buckled him in. And I just told him, I said, we got a long ride, man. So I fired her up, and off we went. And it took us quite a while. Once I crossed the second state line, I called and let that law enforcement agency know that they had 2 officers that were at their house that needed assistance. They weren't injured, but they needed assistance. Well, within 20 minutes of me making that call, I got a call from the agency that contracted me. And it's the captain, and he is laughing his guts out. And I'm like, what can I do for you, sir? And he goes, holy shit, man. He goes, I am getting calls right now. And I'm like, you are? And he goes, oh my God. He goes, what did you do? And I'm like, I said, I have your fugitive in custody. And he goes, yeah. He goes, I was assuming that. He goes, do you know what your ETA is? I said, I'm not going to tell you that right now. I said, and you'll know kind of where I'm at. I says, I'll be there as soon as I can. He goes, whatever time you come in, he goes, just come to the Sally Port. He goes, I will make sure that there is a committee waiting for you. So it took us about 14 hours. I knocked on the Sally Port door, and out walked 4 of the biggest cops I have ever seen in my life. They looked at me and smiled, and I says, he's in the back seat. And they pulled that boy out, and they began to work his ass over. Well, the biggest cop, the boss cop, I don't know what he was, sergeant, whatever. After about 30 seconds of whooping on this guy's ass, he walks over to him and he's panting, and he goes, hey, he goes, I'm sorry. He goes, hotel down the street, prime rib dinner is waiting for you. He goes, stay as long as you want. He goes, the captain said he'll talk to you tomorrow. I was like, okay. Hopped in my rig, and down the road I went. Had me a really nice porterhouse steak and stayed in a really nice room. And, they took really good care of me. And that guy ended up getting the book thrown at him.
How did it change the way you felt about this whole case, the fact that his parents were cops?
It made me sick. It made me sick. I mean, we all love our children. But if one of my children did something truly bad, like bad enough that I thought that they'd spend their life in prison, I would have schooled the hell out of them. I really would. I would beat them so badly, they would never forget.
And that, for you, is a more effective punishment than time in jail?
Oh, I know it would be. If people'd clean up their own messes, then there'd be a lot less problems.
But then at the very start of our conversation, you said law and order is everything, and if we don't have law and order, it falls apart.
That is law and order. You think that me not correcting my children is not law and order? I'm a lot harder than the justice system would be. A lot harder. Justice system's going to what? Throw them in cuffs and put them in jail? And then they're going to be exposed to a bunch of rapists and pedophiles and murderers and drugs and gangs and stuff in prison, and that's gonna fix them? No. I'd probably do everything I could to get them out of the country and get them set up and relocate them somewhere and You know, I wouldn't want to see my child at 21 years old put away in prison for the rest of their life because they did something fucked up. Excuse my mouth, Sam.
So, in fact, you can't blame these cops, right? Because they're doing what...
I didn't judge them.
You did. You said it made you sick that they did that.
It did make me sick.
But you would have done the same.
But I wasn't a cop sworn to protect and defend the Constitution and all that, was I? Military and law enforcement swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, right? Now, those cops, you know, I can't speak for them. It was their kid, but they took an oath. And the thing is when you take an oath to something like that, and then you completely shit on it, I don't understand that. I just don't.
Most people wouldn't know how to beat somebody up. But you've been seeing that since you were 7 years old, since you were 5 years old. That's got to have had an effect.
Maybe.
Is it something you've thought about before, or has it never crossed your mind?
I never really think about it, to be honest with you. I just live my life and I try to do right. Doesn't mean I'm always right. Hell, probably wrong most of the time, but I try. No, I don't try. Try means fail. I do right when I can.
But I'm wondering whether this visceral reaction you have to news of children being mistreated surely lights something in you from that time in your life.
I don't know. Probably. Because when I get my hands on one of those son of a bitches, let me tell you, there ain't nobody can beat me. I don't care who it is. I don't care how bad I'm hurt. I don't care what happens. The person or persons that are in front of me, when I'm fighting for something like that, I can't lose. Never.
On the next episode...
So I called the cops again. I said, I need backup at this area right now. And they're like, we're going to send units. You're getting arrested. And I'm like, I'm taking him down right now. And they shot him dead in front of his wife. But I know for a fact that this man was a friend of mine and he was innocent and he was a good man. And the cop looks over my shoulder and there's Pookie with his .45 trained right in that cop's face. And all these cops are pulling their guns out and they're like, put your weapon down. And I'm like, if I draw my weapon, I said, you're going to die, buddy.
American Vigilante is a Crowd Network original. It's presented by me, Sam Walker. It's produced by Phil Brown and Steve Jones. The executive producer for Crowd is Mike Carr. The executive producer for Stowaway Entertainment is Jeff Singer. The music we use is from our partners, BMG Production Music. If you want another Crowd podcast to listen to, try Death of a Rock Star. It's the stories of Kurt Cobain, Whitney Houston, Bob Marley, John Lennon, and more, all told like you've never heard them before. It's a series about being adored by millions, what it feels like, and what it does to you. Go and search for Death of a Rock Star and have a listen.
Crowd Network, a place where you belong.